on World News Tonight. New hope. Intensive peace talks between Ukraine and Russia may have had the biggest breakthrough yet, as Russian forces have vowed to retreat from Kyiv, leaving room for more negotiations to end the bloodshed in the future. Booster battle. As COVID variants continue to evolve in severity and spread, jab makers fight to keep the efficacy of vaccines viable enough to protect all who use them, leading to yet another booster dose to shut down any hope of COVID resurgence. Australia goes under. Heavy rains continue to hit the country, which is yet again submerged under massive floods. The scenes from earlier this month repeat itself as thousands flee for safety from the fast currents. And a possum party. Furry friends in Venezuela take a break from the rough life by throwing the coolest pool party around.
This is Derana World News Tonight. Reporting from Colombo, here is Suzanne Shanali.
Good evening and thank you for joining us on World News Tonight. We're starting off with more updates on the crisis in Ukraine. It may be too early for the world to hold its breath, but a glimmer of optimism is portrayed this evening as Russia announces that they drastically reduce military operations near Kyiv to increase trust. Now, trust is in short supply as Russian missiles struck elsewhere, and American military officials say that this sign of movement may be just a repositioning of Russian forces.
The new talks between Russia and Ukraine began with deep mistrust. No handshake, but after 4 hours, the most significant progress so far. Russia's deputy defense minister announcing Russian troops would drastically reduce activity in central Ukraine around Kyiv and the city of Chernihiv. Ukrainian officials saying no foreign troops, all have to leave Ukraine. But that Ukraine would negotiate on the future status of Russian-backed separatist areas in Donbass, leave open the issue of Russian-held Crimea, and critically accept neutrality, not pursuing NATO membership, in exchange for international security guarantees. But is it real progress or a trap? Russia only agreed to scale back in areas where it was already suffering heavy losses. And in the east, Russia continues to bomb civilians indiscriminately in Mariupol and in Kharkiv.
Despite there being signs of relief on Russia's announcement of retreating from Kyiv, certain other cities in the war-stricken country are not as lucky. Russian onslaught continues to pressure the besieged area of Mariupol as residents mourn its losses while picking up whatever pieces of their lives in an attempt to flee the area.
The besieged city of Mariupol in Ukraine is on the verge of a humanitarian catastrophe. After weeks of heavy bombardment from Russian forces, Mariupol's mayor, Vadim Boychenko, on Monday said all civilians must be evacuated from the city to allow them to escape the crisis. However, many are trapped there without heat or power and scrounging for food from the debris. Ukraine on Monday said it was impossible to create any safe corridors, citing intelligence reports about possible Russian provocations along its routes. The mayor's office said that while almost 300,000 people have already fled, about 160,000 still remain. Against the sound of shelling in the distance, one resident named Gennady was salvaging what was left of his life. Another resident, a design engineer named Irina, spent her whole life in Mariupol, working in one of Ukraine's largest steel mills. She described her life as beautiful before Russia invaded her country more than a month ago. Now she and her family have been forced to take shelter in the remains of their apartment. Russia denies targeting civilians and blames Ukraine for the failure to agree on safe corridors for those trapped. Moscow calls its invasion a special operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. A spokesperson for Mariupol's mayor said that nearly 5,000 people in the city, including more than 200 children, have already been killed.
Over in yet another area conquered by the Russian forces, experts are worrying of a kicking up of radioactive dust following troops moving through the affected areas around Chernobyl without any protective gear. Fears that medical repercussions may soon be on its way due to the saturation of radioactivity in the area.
Russian soldiers drove through a highly toxic zone without radiation protection when they seized the site of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster last February. That's according to 2 Ukrainian workers on duty there at the time, who said they saw the Russians' armored vehicles kick up clouds of radioactive dust as they drove through the so-called Red Forest. It's the most radioactively contaminated area around Chernobyl and got its name when miles of pine trees turned red after absorbing radiation from the 1986 explosion. In an interview, Balthasar Lindauer, the nuclear safety department head at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, called the Russian troops reckless.
We have seen in the first few days a spike in radiation that is very likely due to the transport of heavy military equipment. So that gives you an indication that these troops do not know what they're doing and behaving recklessly.
Lindauer said it was lucky they've done no further damage so far.
The behavior of the troops continues as they have shown in the past. Of course, there is a huge danger for severe accidents that could affect the region, and it would be a disaster.
One of the Chernobyl workers told Reuters some of the soldiers now stationed there said they had never heard of the 1986 nuclear disaster. And one called the Russian soldiers' Red Forest drive suicidal, as inhaling the radioactive dust would likely cause internal radiation. Reuters could not independently verify their accounts, and Russia's defense ministry did not respond to requests for comment. The Russian military said after capturing the plant that radiation was within normal levels and their actions prevented possible nuclear provocations by Ukrainian nationalists.
EU countries Belgium, the Netherlands, Ireland and the Czech Republic announced the expulsion of dozens of Russian diplomats suspected of spying in coordination of action taken in the shadow of Moscow's war in Ukraine.
As the war in Ukraine endures, so does the diplomatic fallout. In the latest round of expulsions on Tuesday, several EU countries kicked out dozens of Russian diplomats suspected of spying. The Netherlands expelled 17 officials, with Dutch intelligence services reportedly finding that they were actually Moscow's own intelligence officers.
We have received information from our intelligence services. That is what I can say in broad terms. We have done this for the sake of Dutch security, but of course, in a greatly fluid context, which needs continuous assessment.
Those suspected of espionage were told to leave the country within 2 weeks. A similar operation got underway in Belgium, where the country's foreign minister Sophie Wilmers announced 21 people working in the Russian embassy and consulate were identified in involvement in espionage and influence operations threatening national security. In the Czech Republic, one diplomat working in the embassy in Prague was also given just 3 days to leave, while Ireland expelled 4 senior officials from the Russian embassy in Dublin, having engaged in alleged undiplomatic behavior, a code for spying. While the Russian Foreign Ministry denounced the expulsions, saying it would respond in kind, no further details were provided. In a separate retaliatory move on Tuesday, Moscow expelled a dozen staffers from Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, all given the same deadline to leave as their Russian counterparts 2 weeks earlier.
Russia's top independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta, whose chief editor was last year awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, said it was suspending publication until the end of Moscow's military action in Ukraine. The newspaper said it had received warnings from Russia's media regulator.
A simple message on its homepage saying Novaya Gazeta would no longer publish any content online or in print until the end of Russia's engagement in Ukraine. The independent outlet made its decision after receiving a second warning in a week from the authorities, saying they violated the foreign agent law. The editor-in-chief, Dmitry Muratov, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021 for his work with the paper. Last week, he donated his medal to a charity for wounded Ukrainians and refugees. This Monday, he said,
"There is no other solution. It's a horrible and painful decision, but we have to protect one another."
Since the start of the invasion, the Kremlin has doubled down on its crackdown of what it says is fake news. Many Russian and foreign websites have been blocked, but until Monday, Novaya Gazeta was the last stronghold for a free press in the country. Famous for its investigations on corruption and human rights abuses in Chechnya, the paper was an outlier in the Russian media landscape. This commitment to transparency came at a cost. 6 of its collaborators have been killed since the 1990s, including the famous journalist Anna Politkovskaya, who was assassinated in 2006.
Let's go into a short commercial break. We'll be back soon with more world news. Welcome back to World News Tonight, and we move on to some updates on the COVID pandemic around the globe. US regulators authorized a second booster dose of the 2 most commonly used COVID-19 vaccines for everyone over 50 and above. They are intended to offer more protection against severe diseases and hospitalization.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration on Tuesday authorized a second COVID-19 booster dose for adults aged 50 and older, amid concerns about the highly contagious and newly predominant BA.2 Omicron variant, which has driven new spikes in cases in other countries. The agency said the new boosters, a 4th round of shots of the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines, should be administered at least 4 months after the previous dose. Dr. Peter Hotez, professor of pediatrics and molecular virology at Baylor College of Medicine, says another booster could be critical for protection.
We have data now from the Centers for Disease Control showing that after a few months out of your first booster, you have a decline in effectiveness to around 66% protection against emergency room visits, 78% versus hospitalizations. In addition to that, we have data coming out of Israel now saying that if you get that second booster, the 4th dose, it tends to restore it to that previous effectiveness.
Scientists and officials have debated for months if and when an additional booster shot would be needed, as they parsed data on how long protection from the vaccines and boosters would last. COVID cases in the United States have dropped sharply since a record surge in January, but have seen a small uptick over the past week, according to data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The U.S. National Public Health Agency said on Tuesday that the BA.2 subvariant of Omicron was estimated to account for more than half the coronavirus variants in the country. A resurgence of COVID-19 cases in parts of Asia and Europe has raised concerns that another wave could follow in the United States, but the country's health experts believe it is unlikely. A top official said on Tuesday that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration will weigh the benefits of authorizing another round of boosters of either the Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna COVID-19 vaccine to a broader population in the fall.
India resumed regular international commercial passenger flight operations after nearly 2 years since a closure in March 2020. So far, a total of almost 1,800 flights of 60 airlines from 40 countries have been allowed to operate to and from India. For more news, let's cross over to other Derana World News special correspondent Gayatri Gunasekar, who joins us now from Delhi in India for more. Gayatri.
Yes, Shinali. The airport in New Delhi saw more passengers than before. In accordance with the requirements of India's Civil Aviation Department, air crews are not required to wear protective gear on board. The airport services are also moving closer to normal. According to the New Delhi International Airport Service Recovery Plan, by the first week of April, flights to Africa, Asia Pacific and Europe will be back to half capacity. Airlines to the Middle East will be running at 85% of capacity, and air routes to North America will have the highest demand at 149% of capacity. India suspended international commercial passenger flights since March 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. After approximately 2 years, workers of Indian aviation industry believe that the reopening of commercial passenger flights will be a positive move for the market. Data from India's leading booking website shows that the number of consumers who are planning to travel hit a record high, and the searches for international flights went up 40% from the past. International travelers were relieved, stating that it is a great decision by the government to allow personal meetings for businesses, expecting the change to greatly benefit the economy and help business to bloom in the country. Airlines industry sources said that the ticket price, which should be on downward trend as the international passenger capacity increases, could rise by 25 to 30% on many routes due to the rising international oil prices caused by the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Back to you, Shanali.
All right, thank you. That was Derana World News Special Correspondent Gayatri Gunasekara reporting from Delhi in India. Heavy rains pounded Australia's east coast, submerging roads and bridges while tens of thousands fled their homes for the second time within weeks after fast-moving floodwaters burst riverbanks and broke over levees.
Cars submerged and the main street unrecognisable. They thought the worst was behind them. But the northern town of Lismore in the Australian state of New South Wales has been pounded by heavy rains for a second time in a month. And fast-moving floodwater has broken riverbanks and levees. Australia's east coast summer has been dominated by the La Niña climate pattern, typically associated with greater rainfall for the second straight year. Up the road at tourist hotspot Byron Bay, central businesses are already underwater. Anik Newell is a Byron Bay shop owner.
Oh, it's devastating. I've had the store for 17 years, so I've put many years and a lot of love and hard work. So no matter if there is or there is not insurance, I think it's my livelihood and has been my life for 17 years. So it's very sad.
The state's biggest city, Sydney, has recorded 21 inches of rain so far this month, its wettest March on record.
In recent accusation against Trump on the January 6 riots and also the felonies suspected to be linked to the controversial figure, more information is now coming into light. It was discovered that there was a major gap in the call of history of Trump's mobile devices, roughly lining up to the times of the fatal attack in the Capitol.
White House records show a gap of more than 7 hours in former President Donald Trump's official phone calls the day of the deadly January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. That's according to a report out Tuesday by the Washington Post and CBS. The news outlets reported logs obtained by congressional investigators probing the attack showed no calls placed to or by Trump between 11:17 a.m. and 6:54 p.m.
Take that house! Take it now!
During that window, Trump supporters smashed windows and fought their way through police to get inside the U.S. Capitol in an effort to prevent lawmakers from certifying the results of the 2020 presidential election. According to the Post and CBS, 11 pages of records turned over to lawmakers showed Trump talked to at least 8 people by phone before the gap and 11 afterward. Representatives for the committee and Trump could not be immediately reached for comment on the report, but public reporting revealed Trump was in communication with allies as the violent siege was underway. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy last year described talking to Trump during the riot, saying he urged the president to call off his supporters and accept his defeat. And during that gap, Trump repeatedly posted false claims about election fraud to Twitter. The revelation comes a day after a U.S. federal judge wrote that Trump, quote, more likely than not, committed a felony by trying to pressure his vice president to obstruct Congress and overturn his election defeat. That opinion came as part of a ruling that Trump's former lawyer, John Eastman, must turn over emails with the former president to congressional investigators.
Welcome back to World News Tonight. For more news, let's take you around the world in a minute. Emergency responders said multiple people were killed in gun attacks near the Israel coastal city of Tel Aviv, in the third fatal gun or knife spree in the Jewish state in a week. Experts warn that the earthquake-hit volcano island of São Jorge in Portugal's Azores archipelago could see an eruption like the Spain's La Palma, which destroyed thousands of properties and crops over 85 days. Just as Ghana's small businesses owners began to shift from cash-based sales, many believe in proposed electronic payments tax, locally known as the e-levy, will price them out of the digital economy. Singapore will reopen borders and lift quarantine requirements for all vaccinated travelers on the 1st of April, joining a string of countries in Asia moving from firmly towards a living with the virus approach. Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan is likely to step down after his party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf's ally and the main coalition partner, Muttahid-e-Qawmi Movement Pakistan, reached an agreement with the opposition Pakistan People's Party. And that's all the news we got for you tonight. Join us again tomorrow for more news around the globe. Just in case you couldn't watch any of the stories we aired tonight, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Derana English. We're leaving you tonight with visuals of Venezuelan dogs that went for a splash and a dip in their pool, together with their owners, on the eastern hills of the capital, Caracas. Thank you for watching us again. Good night.